it's interesting once you can connect an aspect of feeling, tranquility and calmness in yourself, that the simple act of paying attention to your breath allows you to do, you don't really want to come out. You don't really want to open.
Ready to nod off.
It's so. It's so.
If you'd fallen asleep, I was thinking maybe I could too.
If you're tired, you'll definitely fall asleep. And
I shouldn't be tired. I slept really well.
The thing is that being tired and being awake, we often we don't know how tired we actually are until we start doing a simple practice like that. So, sometimes I go to bed at night and I feel quite energetic, ramped up, and I could go for hours more. You know, usually doing something frivolous like watching a movie or something. But then as soon as I sit down, and I try to often do a simple practice of meditation before I go to sleep. These days, because I seem to have a lot going on, I find myself waking up after 2 hours still sitting there, and I've fallen asleep within minutes of just sitting there. All right. So any feedback, either from yourself, Anne, or from Michael?
No.
Regarding meditation?
Beg your pardon?
Regarding meditation?
Yeah, regarding any experience you've just had or meditation, that's right.
I couldn't get settled.
Couldn't get settled?
I couldn't get settled. I felt itchy. I felt uncomfortable, and I was a lot of arrogance with it to start with. No, arrogance as in my arrogance. My arrogance of, I've only just finished meditating, I don't need to.
Right.
So there was a struggle there.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm sorry for making noise and carrying on.
It's all right.
Yeah. Fidgeting and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So thank you for being so honest about that, Michael. What about you, Anne? Were you able to listen and then?
Yeah, my mind wandered a few times.
Yeah.
About stuff.
Yeah.
Just stuff.
Yeah.
Nothing really important.
Yeah.
And then I'm saying, you need to be focusing on the breath and just focus on the breath. So, but I certainly felt so.
One of the interesting things with a practice of going within, and that is one of the ways of going within, is that the driving force of it is your own thirst, meaning your own desire and want to connect with a part of yourself that emanates tranquility and joy and the feelings that you like. So as you become more familiar with the practice and the skill, because it is a skill, as you've just so rightly said, Anne, when you first start doing something like this, even if you've been doing it for years, it's one of the few things in life that no matter how much you've done it, it only is relevant to the day that you're in right now. You could have been meditating for the last 20 years of your life. And if you don't meditate, for instance, today, then you become susceptible to the trickiness of your own mind and the illusion of this world. So I'm sorry, that's how it is. I didn't invent it that way, but it's definitely my experience. It's definitely the experience of anyone who's ever written about this, both in the scriptures and in other texts of people and in modern practices. So it's designed to be able to focus your mind and bring your mind to a central point requires effort on a daily basis. Yes, there is an aspect of effortlessness that starts to evolve over a period of time. But it's like your mind is like, well, the analogy is that it's like a monkey, or it's like a young child who you can ask it to do something, but there is no guarantee it will do it, or he or she will do it. So that aspect is a daily thing initially to bring it to a point of focus that you want to focus on. And of course, there are many things of value that you can focus on during the day. So this is one aspect, and this focus is, you okay, Michael?
Oh, no. Those things make me down. Sorry.
He'll be back.
That's all right. Hopefully he's okay.
Yeah, he's fine. He hasn't collapsed.
He might be having an allergic reaction to those lozenges. Sometimes they stick pretty unusual things in there.
We've both just given up smoking. So he's sucking on.
Oh my God.
He's into the lollies. I'm into the nicotine lozenges. So.
Right.
I want a cigarette.
Yeah, no, you don't.
Neither of you obviously haven't had your sick and tired moment yet. Completely.
Well, no.
Smoking. If you do have it, value it.
No.
It'll propel you to give it up.
Well, we've quit, both of us.
Have you?
Haven't we, Michael?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
I'm struggling.
We're supporting each other.
Right. All right. Okay. I'm just going to bring up a couple of slides that'll give us some talking points to dive a little bit deeper into psyche. Last week you had trouble reading or seeing the slide. Is it okay? Can you see it there today?
Yeah, I can see it.
Can you still read that writing?
Yeah.
And you probably, I'm not expecting you to read that little writing, but can you read the big words?
Yeah.
You too, Michael?
Yeah, I can read the big stuff, but not the
No.
stuff that's highlighted
That's
underneath
right.
it.
I prepared it like this. When I'm actually there physically and I'm projecting it up onto the wall, usually it's much better quality and you can read it. But this, I've designed it this way so I will read out the small stuff. And yeah, so the headings are just a sort of a thing to get us going. So last week, just to recap a little bit, partly for your benefit, Michael, last week we started this topic and, well, in response to Anne choosing this topic from our little roadmap mandala that I've created there. And this is by no means the all-encompassing aspect of mindfulness, but there are some key points on here that directly relate to the evidence-based practice and understandings of mindfulness. So I had a personal interest in psyche, so I put that on there because I knew it has some aspect, an important aspect to do with mindfulness. So Anne chose psyche. So it all goes pear-shaped. It's simple. We just blame Anne. No problem at all.
No worries.
All right. And then to recap, last week, Anne started talking about quite in depth about her understanding and her concept and interest in the word psyche, and it had to do with what we call the chakra system. Now, I won't elaborate on that at the moment, but I'll recap on that just a little bit later. And that's one aspect. And because Anne chose that to actually amplify and talk about, I'm going to show a slide in a moment that that puts that in context in regards to psyche and in regards to mindfulness. So just to ask you, Michael, do you have any input in regards to what the word psyche means to you? And even if you want to go further, how it might relate to mindfulness?
My understanding of it, and I really don't have any understanding of the word. And I know it's a derivative of what you said, psychology and so forth.
Yeah.
I just kind of look at it as like the mist of their mind that's all intertwined with different things. You know, thoughts, different thoughts and how it reacts with your body, I suppose. But really, I don't know. I really have never studied it before, never really looked at it, never really thought about it too much.
Okay, great. One of the most powerful statements you can make is, I don't know, particularly to other people. So that's good. Right. Well, in that case, let's move on. I'm not asking you, Anne, because you've already gone through it, but you can, yeah, some more things in a moment. So these are basically, I thought of words, and there's probably other words that I haven't thought about. If you think of any, let me know, because I can add these on there for next time. But psyche or psych derives from psyche, and as we use it, these four words are more common words that we've probably heard in our life. Maybe you haven't heard of psyche per se, but you've heard of the word psychic. I'm sure you've heard of psychology, and you've probably even heard of psychiatry. And there's a lot of actual information in here. So I'll just read it out and then ask questions or talk about it. So this sort of going into this topic, and I was sort of mentioning it a little bit before, is really just designed to loosen things up a little bit in the, you might say, the breadth of the understanding, and Michael was saying this a little bit, of your own mind and the way you behave, and what are the forces in our mind, and that's very relevant, of course, in regards to potential addictions and behaviours of yourself that you don't like or don't want to do. So if you're bold and brave and able to withstand some of the strong winds that emanate, and rain and hail even, storms even, from within yourself at various times, that's relevant to this discussion. Because some of those storms, the origin of those storms is your own psyche. It's not necessarily because of something that's just happened outside of you. So it's really useful to know that, and that is part of knowing yourself more. The psyche, these are just basically mostly definitions just from the dictionary, but I've filled some of them out. So psyche, the human soul, mind, or spirit, comes from the Greek word. I'm not sure how they pronounced it, but it looks like it's spelt differently, but it looks like it's spelt like psyche. And the Greek word psyche means breath, life, or soul. So hence, I was saying before, that's the link to breath. Somewhere in that, and of course this goes back thousands of years, and it's interesting, you've all heard of the Chinese whisper, some things get lost in translation, whereas some of the original understanding of the word changes over a period of time, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Worse meaning an important aspect is lost. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Psychic, donating, So this is now touching on the aspect to some degree that Anne was bringing up last week. So psychic. I'm sure we've all heard the word psychic. We've seen it on movies, we've heard about it, maybe we've thought about it, maybe we've read about it. So here's some of the aspects. Denoting faculties or phenomena that are apparently inexplicable by natural laws, especially involving telepathy or clairvoyance. Now, to amplify that out, because I've had, I went deep into these aspects before. You might say these are right brain aspects. What does that mean? That means, well, just suspend all logic for the moment and just be open to exploring some things that might exist that are inexplicable by natural laws. So I don't know if anyone's ever done that. I'm sure Anne's done that to some degree because she's shown an interest in that. I don't know if you've ever done that, Michael, but here are some of the aspects of that. And when I said right brain, the right brain has a more holistic, you might say, feeling perspective on things. This is very much a generalization, whereas the left brain has a very analytical and wants the evidence perspective on things. So this realm that we're now just talking about, the psychic realm, is that realm where it's the things that you come across and experience and participate in are often inexplicable by natural laws. Or in other words, we can't explain them well with our right brain, or we haven't figured out yet how to do it. And by the way, this will come up when we get into some of the old psychoanalysts like Freud and Jung. We don't fully understand the human psyche. So we're now here talking about a topic that mankind, womankind, civilization, our learnings are still trying to get their head around. And psychology is a science that's trying to do that, but it hasn't figured it out by any means in its entirety, but it's trying. So back to psychic. Psychic. What are some of the other aspects of the word psychic? Psychic healing energy. And I put in brackets Reiki. You may have heard of that. There are different forms of energy healing. Reiki is one of them. The psychic healing energy. Visualization and focus. And I've got in brackets chakras. And that's what Anne was actually talking about last week. So the practice of using the technique of visualization and using focus on energy sources or energy hotspots in the body that relate to the spine. And I'm going to amplify on that for Anne's benefit and all our benefit in a moment. And as I'm reading this out, just flag any of these points that you might find interesting or want to talk more about. Another one in relation to psychic is active imagination. Active imagination is a term that was coined actually by Carl Jung, and we'll talk more about him later. It is a technique and a means of helping you, or one of the things is to help you understand your own contents of your own visions or dreams that come up from your unconscious, subconscious, whatever you want to call it, into your conscious mind. But you have no idea how to interpret it. So he invented a technique, it's a very powerful technique called active imagination, not without its own dangers as well. And I'll describe what that means in a moment if you're interested. Another thing, remote viewing. I don't know if you've heard about that, but that is, again, using techniques of your mind to travel to different geographical locations, not even locations on this planet. And there's some understanding or some evidence that even the CIA used some of these techniques. I don't know if they're still using it these days, but they definitely used it in the past, particularly during Of course, they used it for subversive, particularly during the Cold War, like that. Another word, synchronicity. Another word, premonition. These are all under the umbrella of psychic. Visions, dream interpretation. I don't know if you can you guys see that, what I'm holding up?
Interpretation of dreams.
Yeah, that's it. Big, fat, thick book written by Sigmund Freud called The Interpretation of Dreams. So very different from a lot of the dream interpretation that you might dial into on the Saturday's paper or on the internet. It's not by no means that superficial, but it's been used to again elucidate some of the aspects of our deeper psyche, or as Jung called it, our unconscious, and as Freud called it as well. Another aspect is energy frequency healing, and that's something I've had my own personal experience with as well. So these are, and of course you've got the old, what we all know about as telepathy and clairvoyance. In other words, being able to apparently read someone's mind or tell someone, if anyone's ever been to a psychic reading where you go to someone and they start telling you about things about yourself, which apparently they don't know anything about, but they're getting this information via some sort of process that's called a psychic process. So all of that. Anyone? Any feedback? Any revulsion? Any any interest? Any questions?
No, it's pretty straightforward to me.
Okay, good. And anything?
No.
No? Okay.
I mean, I like the sound of all of that.
Right. Okay. Great. Psychology. I finished a degree in psychology last year, so it's huge, and so a lot of studies these days. It's a relatively new and evolving science in the scheme of things of many other sciences. It's a scientific study of the human mind and its functions, mental characteristics or attitude of a person or even a group, especially those affecting behavior in a given context. So it's a little bit different to physiology, and even as we get onto at the moment, psychiatry. And you're about to do, if you go to the class, the ACE class. So the ACE class is looking at the functions of the brain. Psychology is has its little tentacles these days into many other forms of science, which I think is a good thing, because to get an overall understanding of the world that we live in and our own selves, it's not the old premise of science that cut things up into pieces, empirical, so you can understand an aspect is changing. So psychology looks at the functions of the mind, and modern psychology bringing in many, many new things. I'll tell you one interesting thing, and you can actually bring this up in the ACE class if you want, is that if you have an actual physical problem in your brain, like there's actually been some damage or something is not, the wiring is not right, not overall in the whole brain, but even just one little part, and it might be influencing, for instance, you to even be able to concentrate and comprehend the words that I'm saying. Or you might have trouble in reading words. You read a word and you see the word, but it's just not going in. You can see it physically, or other sort of things, and they're called to some degree, well, not entirely, but psychopathology as well. So in other words, you could have an actual physical problem in the brain, and one of the new advances of psychology is that simply through a process of asking you questions, of putting you through a questionnaire, and sometimes also doing a little bit of other sensation-based measurements, you can actually now start, not everything, but you can start to pinpoint actual problems, physical problems in the brain. That's quite an interesting, unique, and modern thing. And you have to go to a neuropsychologist to have that done. And that's common with, particularly with in development of children, if they're having problems and they're maybe having developmental delays and things like that. Some of those things can be shown up simply by asking specific, of course, questions. So, yeah, I found that particularly interesting. That was one aspect of psychology. There's another aspect, as I just mentioned, psychopathology, which is the study of mental disorders. Now, this is really useful, and we talk about this in mindfulness because it may not be entirely relevant to you two, or maybe it is and I don't know about it, but say you've been diagnosed with some psychological condition like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar. The list goes on, and the list is growing, by the way. You know, autism spectrum disorders. That's a whole new area that's opening up and broadening out as well. And just for your own knowledge, there's a thing called the DSM, which is it's got a strange name, but it's called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's been in development for the last 10 years. And in some ways, it's really good because it helps us clearly articulate and define a disorder, say, like anxiety. And the way that they define it is through a batch of symptoms, interrelated symptoms. So, and they've gone to very great detail to, if you went to a psychologist, for instance, Michael, and you were overly stressed and you thought you might have anxiety, well, then you are put through again. It's actually a questionnaire that then tries to establish your symptoms. And the more boxes you tick with those symptoms, then there's a higher chance that you will have a diagnosis of anxiety. That's basically how
points of it.
Yeah, and they can't, for instance, the whole reason of having a definitive diagnosis of a mental disorder, I'd say, is so that they can then conduct a treatment or an intervention or more precisely prescribe a medication. No one is allowed to prescribe a medication if you don't have a diagnosis. That's illegal. You can't do that.
They like that.
So there's a dark side to all of that, of course, is that there's a stigma to diagnoses, and of course a diagnosis can be wrong, which happens. And a stigma means that sometimes a diagnosis can be liberating. I heard someone just talking about autism in later life just last night, actually on the news, or something that was on the news. And they said it was liberating when they were quite older, like 35 or something like that, when they were diagnosed. They met all the diagnostic criteria of autism, and it was a relief. And that's fair enough too. But sometimes the other side of that is that you might be diagnosed with a bit of depression, but, well, do you actually have clinical depression? I'm not going to go into details of that, but there can be stigma associated with those things. You don't want work colleagues, you don't want your family to know, I'm depressed, I've been diagnosed with depression, anxiety, or even post-traumatic stress or whatever. So just that's psychology, and there's the good and the bad side to it, and I'm just giving you a little bit of an overview there of because it's relevant to psyche. It's sort of they're drawing upon that initial understanding of psyche. So modern psychology has evolved quite differently from the original founders, you might say, of psychology, the original psychoanalysts like Jung and Freud. And I will talk about that more later on, or we'll talk about that, because that opens up some of other aspects. You might say the soul aspect of psyche. And there's some modern psychologists who have claimed that almost the soul has been exorcised out of the contemporary practice of psychology. So that will become clear. Because just let me just say one point there. Just because you're feeling down or you're feeling stressed or you're tormented at this time by things that have happened to you in the past does not mean that there's something wrong with you. I just want to make that clear. Because it's easy, and that's one of the criticisms of modern psychology, in that it can have a tendency to over-pathologize things that you're uncomfortable with. This is a really important point. You know what I mean by over-pathologize?
Yeah.
In other words, yeah, it's saying that there's something wrong with you. You need to be fixed. You're sick, right? That's sort of what it means. So because you're not comfortable and you're feeling something uncomfortable or you're on edge, doesn't mean necessarily that you can then be diagnosed, take a medication. I'm not saying that those things aren't important, of course, but it's important if we're talking about this subject of psyche that you're aware of that. Does that make sense, Anne?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Is Michael okay?
Yeah.
Psychiatry. Quickly, just the study and treatment of mental illness, emotional disturbance, and an abnormal behaviour. Now, here's an interesting one I think you'll relate to, Anne. The origin of the word psychiatry actually comes partly from psyche, which we've established as meaning soul or mind. But the second part of it, iatria, means healing. So iatros means healer. So psychiatry in its original pure context, and for instance, I've just been talking about Jung. He was around, he died in 1957, but he was around the early part of the century. He was called the doctor of the soul. He was one of the first psychiatrists. And he really looked deep into the soul to help try to heal his patient. And he discovered many unusual things in that process. So the original derivation of the word psychiatry, you might say, is doctor of the soul. Again, people are referred these days to psychiatrists, although psychologists can now also prescribe some medications, not all of them, but because a psychiatrist has to be a doctor, I don't know if you know that, but it has to be an MD, a medical doctor, plus obvious training in psychology, plus usually some speciality of psychology. So if you get referred to a psychiatrist, then these days the understanding is that you definitely looks like you have some sort of pathology, and that you will probably need a serious intervention, either therapy or a medication of some sort. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You okay with that, Michael?
Yep. Sorry?
You okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Great.
Fine.
Awesome. You got problems there with your breathing, have you, or your?
I've got problems with my brain and the nicotine receptors.
Can you amplify on that? What do you actually mean? What's going on with you?
I'm trying to distract them and put them off and tell them later on that it's not working.
Oh, I see. Have you got a craving for a cigarette? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Right.
Yes.
Okay, I see. How? So you're experiencing some withdrawal symptoms, by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
How long has it been?
It's
since?
Hey?
How long's it been since you've had a hit of nicotine?
Yesterday afternoon or yesterday at 6 o'clock, I think it was.
Right.
Maybe. I don't know, something like that.
Right. Are you serious about giving it up?
Oh, of course. Wouldn't be going through this if I wasn't serious. I wouldn't do 30 packets of lollies if I was serious.
Distract yourself. Well, geez, we've almost run out of time there. So maybe, can you see that pretty strange gentleman there? Those tattoos on his body. I was just going to just briefly say this, so I'll try to make this as interesting as possible for you, Michael, to help distract you at least for a couple of minutes. I'm just, this is my little take on wrapping it up in regards to what Anne was talking about last week. And by the way, I've asked you all if it's okay to record these classes, and I post the classes, and I've actually just done that yesterday. So Anne, you don't have to go and listen to them, but if you want to, just Google Hartmut Günther YouTube. But some benefit if you want to. I'm certainly not saying you have to. You can get a recap of what went on in a class, but also you can hear yourself talking. That is both horrifying and enlightening.
I forgot about it. I could have watched last episode or class myself before this class.
Did you? Right.
No, I could have. I should have, and it would have saved a little bit of time. But
no, it's okay. It's all right, because even though we're not actually duplicating the information, so it's all new. But anyway, because I was just sort of mentioning it more for Anne because she spoke quite a bit last week. So again, it's horrifying and enlightening, and that's my own experience. But let's gravitate towards enlightening. You learn about yourself hearing it. Okay. So again, just to provide a synopsis of what Anne was talking about, the chakra system originated in India between 1500 and 500 BC. That's a long time ago. That's around 3,500 years ago. And it's pronounced chakra in English. And it sort of has a derivation of the word wheel or circle. So, and the chakras are defined as, according to those ancient systems, as various focal points used in a variety of ancient meditation practices, collectively denominated as Tantra. Tantra is a form of esoteric meditation, and it's also, or an esoteric or inner traditions of Hinduism. And Hinduism is one of the original religions that came out of India, one of the oldest, actually, along with Judaism and Islam and a couple of the others. There's 5, as far as I know, the ancient traditions, and most of those ancient traditions, including Hinduism, have text, like writings that go back thousands of years, and in particular in relation to the chakra systems and this esoteric tantric practices that we're talking about. There's lots of information from these old texts, and so the beliefs differ between the Indian religions, as of course they would, with many Buddhist texts consistently mentioning 5 chakras, while the Hindu sources offer 6 or even 7. Did you come across that, Anne?
Yeah, there are always 7. I've always known them to be 7.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that there's some.
And actually, they said there's more that.
Yeah.
I haven't read.
I didn't write it here, but some of the modern interpretations have listed 114
Well, I was going to say there apparently are more
Yeah.
that I've recently become aware of, but 7 is enough for me to deal with at the moment. So.
Good. Some modern interpreters speak of them as complexes of electromagnetic variety. And within the Kundalini Yoga, again, it's a combination of physical and energetic practices, obviously. So within Kundalini Yoga, the techniques of breath exercises, visualization, mudras, bandharas, kriyas, and mantras are focused on manipulating the flow of subtle energy through the chakras. So that's what Anne was talking a little bit about last week, using visualization practices to interact. And then the concept is that you can then change in a beneficial way the flow of energy through the chakras. And you correct me if I say anything that's not correct, will you, Anne? And that is a sort of a visual representation. You can see these little, usually the chakras are represented in a sort of a mandala, a geometric or a lotus flower type situation. So this is a nice representation of a gentleman. I can say he's a gentleman because he's got a mustache there, doing an esoteric practice of some form of meditation. The original derivation of yoga, by the way, is also being centered and going within, and a form of meditation and they all have some connection with the breath. Well, they lead back to an awareness of the breath that helps take your awareness within. So when we did, for instance, that little exercise this morning, and this is the last thing I'll say, and we'll wrap it up, of using your attention on your breath, it's not really a visualization exercise. So when we use the word meditation, and I'm very cautious to use the word meditation, because as you can see, the three of us in this room, even though I'm virtually in the room, have different meanings of the word meditation. So
I was just showing Michael a picture of like a human with the various chakras and their colours, and it doesn't say on there on that particular thing. I just bought that.
Great.
Isn't it gorgeous?
So we can. So I might leave that there for today with that. Next week, and I'm only about a third of the way of just making my slides. What I'm trying to do with these classes is do a little tour, historical tour. We sort of jumped into in that talk just then about the chakras, and if you're feeling exhausted, I don't blame you, because you've just spanned 3,500 years. You've just from 3,500 years ago into the present moment. So, but what I'd like to do in this sort of talk about Psyche is just to provide a little sort of chronological journey, and the reason for that is that it correlates to some degree, if you can even relate to something like this, the evolution or the development of our consciousness.
Yeah.
And sometimes consciousness is even synonymously used with psyche. So, and I'll give you one spoiler there. Before about 100 years ago, and this is very recent, there was no real acknowledgement that we have a part of our consciousness that is not conscious. And
yes.
I'm gonna make that clear, because about the word psyche is also used in mythology. The way that indigenous cultures and the older cultures, not all indigenous cultures, tried to talk about these workings within ourself, deeper workings, they projected them onto God. That's what they did. And Roman and Greek mythology is all about the workings of the gods. And I'd be so bold as to say that that's a projection of our own inner processes that can help us understand them. That's what they do. Anyway, we'll go more into that next week. So as we learn more about the
Very hard to get you down if they're mowing.
What was that?
Maintenance man's turned up with the whipper snipper.
Well,
We can't hear very well.
This is a good time to finish.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Time out.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for staying longer as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.